There is a condition that haunts the modern soul, more subtle than depression, more intimate than anxiety. It is success that feels like emptiness. It is praise that sounds like a lie. It is the silent terror of one day being found out, of the whole world realizing you are a fraud. If this feeling is familiar to you, know that you are not crazy. You are just waking up to the most dangerous truth of human existence, that the mask you created to survive in the world may be the very thing that is killing your soul. The persona, as the master Carl Jung named it, is not just a social role. It is a defense system that, when left unchecked, becomes a golden prison. It promises acceptance, but delivers isolation. It promises security, but generates a chronic performance anxiety. And the cruelest symptom of its dominion is the loss of vitality, a death in life, where you perform all social rites perfectly, but inside, the silence is deafening. What we are about to explore here is not self-help. It is psychic surgery. If you are ready to stop being an actor in your own life and become its author, then this journey is for you. This is not a video to be watched passively. It is a mirror to be faced. Subscribe to this channel as an act of rebellion against the tyranny of superficiality. Turn on notifications, because each video is a step on a staircase that descends to meet your true self. Leave a like as a sign that you are here, present, ready for the work. And comment the word awakening to join other travelers who, like you, have chosen the uncomfortable but essential path of truth. The anesthesia is over. The operation begins now. The persona is not an invention of modernity, a consequence of social media or corporate life. It is an archetype, a primordial structure of the human psyche that has existed since the first human being needed to live with the second. It is the inevitable interface, the diplomatic suit we wear to negotiate the complex relationship between our inner universe, a chaos of desires, fears, and contradictions, and the outer universe, with its rules, expectations, and judgments. Without it, we would be like exposed nerves, incapable of filtering the overwhelming social reality. The persona is, in its essence, a mechanism of adaptation. It is the functional I, the face we present to the supermarket cashier, to our boss, and even to our loved ones in certain contexts. It allows us to play roles: professional, parent, friend, child, with a certain degree of competence and predictability, ensuring the cohesion of the social fabric. It is the psychological uniform that signals to others who we are in this context, facilitating interaction and avoiding the constant friction that a completely raw and unfiltered expression of our inner being would cause. Jung understood that society itself depends on these functional masks. Without them, order would collapse. The problem, therefore, lies not in its existence, but in our ignorance of it. We believe we are the uniform. We forget the naked and vulnerable body that dwells beneath, the true essence that pulses with a life of its own. Modern society, with its emphasis on image, personal branding, and constant performance, has exacerbated this identification to pathological levels. We are encouraged from childhood to build a successful, polished persona, and to hide everything that does not fit this mold. The result is a legion of functionally adapted, but anemically malnourished individuals. They are masters at playing the role of themselves, but have completely forgotten the feeling of simply being. This video is the first step to tearing this veil of ignorance, to understanding that you are not the mask. You are the infinitely vaster, more complex, and mysterious being who wears it. To recognize the persona as a tool and not as the totality of your being is the most revolutionary act an individual can perform in a world that incessantly demands that we be only our facade. It is the beginning of the journey back home, to the silent center of the psyche, where the true identity awaits, patiently, to be rediscovered and lived in its fullness. No mask is chosen consciously. It is forged in the depths of our childhood, shaped by the heat and pressure of our first and most crucial relationships. The process begins the moment the baby, a being of pure and undifferentiated essence, what Jung would call the self, perceives that the external world embodied in the figure of the mother or caregiver reacts in different ways to its different expressions. A smile attracts a smile. A cry can attract comfort or irritation. In this primordial mirror, the child learns the first and most brutal lesson of social life. Love and acceptance are often Conditional. To secure the vital connection upon which its survival depends, the child begins, entirely unconsciously, to cleave itself. It amplifies the traits that are rewarded and represses those that are punished, ignored, or met with anxiety. If the expression of joy is celebrated, the child becomes the happy child. If quietness and obedience ensure peace in the home, it becomes the good little child. This first mask, the archetype of the adapted child, is the foundation upon which all other personas will be built. It is a tragic act of self-mutilation in the name of love. What is good and bad is not defined by an internal moral compass, but by the reflection in the eyes of others. Those parts of us that were rejected, the anger, the sadness, the neediness, the wild exuberance, do not disappear. They are exiled to the dark continent of the psyche, forming the core of what Jung called the shadow. The persona and the shadow are thus born as conjoined twins at the very same instant. One is the public face, the idealized photograph. The other is the hidden negative, holding everything we had to deny in order to be accepted. As we grow, the forge expands. The schoolyard becomes the new laboratory, where peer pressure demands new masks: the smart one, the funny one, the strong one, the cool one. Later, university and the workplace will require even more refined specializations. The ego, the manager of our consciousness, takes control of this process, identifying more and more with this construction. It believes that the persona is its identity, for it is through the persona that it navigates, conquers, and defends itself in the world. The danger is that this process, which begins as a survival strategy, becomes an automatic and unconscious way of life. We stop asking ourselves what we truly feel or want, and start asking ourselves what we should feel or want to maintain the image. The mask, born from the desire for connection, becomes the main barrier to true intimacy, both with others and, most tragically, with ourselves. There is a fine, almost invisible line that separates the functional use of the persona from its tyrannical possession. Crossing this line is the difference between psychic health and neurosis. A healthy persona is like a well-fitting wetsuit. It is flexible, conscious, and serves a clear purpose: to allow the diver the true self to explore the depths of the social ocean without drowning or being crushed by the pressure. The diver knows that the suit is not him. He wears it for the mission, and, upon returning to the safety of the boat, he removes it, becoming himself again, breathing his own air. An individual with a healthy persona is able to transition between different social roles with fluidity. He is the focused professional in the office, the playful father in the park, the confidant friend at the cafe. Each role is played with sincerity and competence, but he never loses contact with an inner center that transcends all these roles. He knows that he is not the sum of his functions. His identity and his worth do not depend exclusively on his performance in these areas. This flexibility allows for authenticity, as the persona serves as a channel for the expression of the self, not as a hiding place for it. The inflated persona, on the other hand, is when the wetsuit fuses to the skin. The individual not only forgets that he is wearing a mask, he fervently believes he is the mask. This is what Jung calls identification. The ego inflates, filling the entire space of the persona, and completely loses contact with the other parts of the psyche, especially the shadow and the animus. The professor who is a professor even at the breakfast table, the doctor who treats his wife like a patient, the celebrity who lives 24/7 as their public character, all are examples of this inflation. The danger here is twofold. First, rigidity. Any threat to the persona, criticism, failure, job loss, is felt as a threat of total annihilation, because there is no inner self to fall back on. This generates paralyzing anxiety and a compulsive need for external validation. Second, and more importantly, the psyche seeks balance through a principle called enantiodromia, the tendency for an extreme to turn into its opposite. The more inflated and unilaterally perfect the persona is, the more powerful and primitive the repressed shadow becomes. This is why we see public figures with impeccable images suddenly erupt in self-destructive scandals. It is not hypocrisy, it is the shadow, starved for recognition, blowing up the facade to restore psychic balance. Health, therefore, is not the absence of a persona, but a conscious and humble relationship with it. It is the recognition that we are vastly more than the role the world applauds us for playing. When the identification with the persona is complete, the soul enters a state of captivity. It is a peculiar prison, with no visible bars, often decorated with the trophies of worldly success, wealth, status, recognition. It is a golden prison, and for that very reason, the hardest to escape. The prisoner not only gets used to his chains, he comes to love them, to display them as proof of his worth. It is at this stage that the danger becomes mortal, not for the body, but for the psyche, for the spark of life that animates the being. The first symptom of this fusion is the total loss of spontaneity. Life becomes a meticulously rehearsed script. Every word, every gesture, every decision is calculated to maintain and reinforce the mask. There is no more room for genuine impulse, for vulnerability, for error. The individual becomes a curator of his own image, an exhausted guardian of an empty museum. This constant performance drains a colossal amount of psychic energy. This is why so many people who have it all live in a state of chronic exhaustion, a fatigue that sleep cannot cure, for it is a weariness of the soul. The second and most corrosive symptom is the emergence of the imposter syndrome. Deep down, even if unconsciously, the individual knows he is a fraud. He hears the praise and applause, but they ring hollow, directed at a character he plays, not at who he is. This generates a constant and paralyzing fear of being unmasked. He lives on a tightrope, terrified of a slip-up that might reveal the truth behind the facade of truth he himself is, afraid to face that he does not know who he is without his mask. This feeling of inauthenticity leads to the third and most profound stage of suffering, existential emptiness. The connection to the self, the source of meaning and purpose, is completely severed. Life, even if full of activities and achievements, loses its flavor, its color, its meaning. It is the dark night of the soul described by the mystics, but without the spiritual dimension, it is just darkness. It is the depression that has no obvious external cause, the diffuse anxiety that seems to come from nowhere. In truth, it comes from everywhere. It is the cry of agony from the suffocated soul, from the true self that is being slowly assassinated by the tyranny of the persona. The fusion is the denial of wholeness. By identifying exclusively with our light, the persona, we declare war on our darkness, the shadow. By clinging to the role, we reject the vastness of the actor. It is a psychic suicide in slow motion, where what dies is not the body, but the very possibility of living an authentic, integrated, and meaningful life. When consciousness becomes deaf, trapped in the echo chamber of the persona, the unconscious begins to scream. And it does not speak the language of logic or reason. It speaks the universal and timeless language of symbols through dreams, symptoms, and synchronicities. These are the whispers of the soul, the desperate attempts of the self to break through the captivity and draw the ego's attention to the mortal imbalance occurring in the psyche. Dreams are the primary channel of communication. A ruthless businessman, whose persona is that of a corporate shark, may have recurring dreams of being naked in a boardroom. The dream is not about literal nudity. It is the unconscious screaming. Your facade of power is an illusion. You are exposed, vulnerable, and refuse to admit it. A woman who has built the persona of the perfect mother, always self-sacrificing and smiling, may dream that she is losing her teeth. This is a classic archetype of loss of power, of vitality, of the ability to bite into life and express her own needs and healthy aggression. The unconscious is saying, your self-denial is devitalizing you, leaving you powerless. To ignore these dreams is like ignoring the check engine light on the car's dashboard. Eventually, the system will break down. When dreams are ignored, the unconscious intensifies its communication and begins to speak through the body. Psychosomatic symptoms arise. The chronic back pain in the person who carries the world on their shoulders and refuses to admit their own exhaustion. The stomach problems of the one who swallows insults and represses their anger to maintain the persona of the nice guy. The migraines of the woman who lives under unbearable mental tension to be the brilliant intellectual, denying her body and her emotions. The body does not lie. It becomes the stage where the repressed drama of the soul is enacted. Each symptom is a metaphor, a coded message from the unconscious that says, stop. Look within. Something is terribly wrong. Finally, there is synchronicity, what Jung called meaningful coincidence. When the need for change is urgent, the universe seems to conspire. The person who hates their job, but is trapped in the persona of the successful executive accidentally runs into an old friend who quit everything to follow their passion. The book that falls off the shelf and opens to the exact page that speaks to their dilemma. The phrase you overhear from a stranger on the bus that seems to be a direct answer to a question you asked in silence. These are not random chances. They are bridges that the self builds between the inner and outer worlds. A causal events that serve to break the linear logic of the persona and remind the ego that there is a greater, more mysterious intelligence at play. Listening to these whispers is the beginning of healing. Ignoring them is to guarantee that they will turn into a deafening roar. The persona and the shadow are inseparable, born from the same original split. They exist in a relationship of direct and compensatory opposition. The brighter, more idealized, and more one-sided the light of our persona, the darker, denser, and more primitive the shadow it casts. The psyche, in its innate wisdom, always seeks wholeness. If consciousness insists on living only at one pole, the unconscious will contain, with equal force, the opposite pole. Think of the persona as the photograph we show the world, smiling, well-lit. From the best angle, the shadow is the photographic negative, containing all the opposite colors and shapes, everything that was left out of the final image. The individual who builds a persona of absolute goodness, of altruism and kindness, the saint, will inevitably accumulate in their shadow an immense charge of anger, selfishness, judgment, and aggression. Since he cannot admit these traits in himself, he projects them violently onto the world. He will see evil and selfishness everywhere, becoming a fierce critic of others. Without realizing he is only fighting his own reflected shadow. This is the mechanism behind fanaticism and hypocrisy. Likewise, the person with the persona of the rational intellectual, who prides himself on his logic and despises sentimentality, will have a shadow full of childish emotions, irrationality, and a desperate need for effective connection. This can erupt in overwhelming and inappropriate passions or in emotional outbursts that he is incapable of understanding. What consciousness rejects, the unconscious embraces. The shadow is not inherently evil. It is simply the part of us that has been underdeveloped, rejected, and unlived. It contains not only our flaws, but also a tremendous amount of vital energy, creativity, healthy instincts, and unrealized potential. The woman with the persona of the good girl may have in her shadow the assertiveness and strength she needs to assert herself in the world. The man with the persona of the tough guy may have in his shadow the sensitivity and vulnerability that would make him capable of true intimacy. The work of shadow integration, therefore, is not about eliminating our flaws, but about bringing these repressed parts of ourselves into the light of consciousness. It is a painful process, as it requires us to abandon the idealized image we have of ourselves. It requires us to admit that we are also that which we despise in others, but it is only through this honest and courageous confrontation that the energy trapped in the shadow can be released and integrated, making us more complete, more human, and, paradoxically, more authentic. To ignore the shadow is to allow it to control us from behind, through projections, slips of the tongue, and self-destructive behaviors. To confront it is the path to true inner strength. In the midst of the chaos of masks and shadows, there is an ordering center, a point of stillness in the eye of the psychic hurricane. Jung called this totality the self in German, Selbst, the central archetype, the unifying principle that encompasses both the conscious and the unconscious. The self is not the ego. The ego is merely the center of consciousness, the I that thinks and acts in the world. The self is the center of the entire psyche, the God within, the image of wholeness that an individual's life strives to realize. The journey of individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, is the journey of the ego towards a conscious relationship with the self. When we are imprisoned in the persona, the ego identifies with the mask and completely loses connection with this inner compass. It navigates by the wrong stars, social approval, material success, external expectations. Life becomes a rudderless drift, even if the boat seems to be moving at high speed. The encounter with the true self begins when the ship of the persona hits a reef. A crisis, the loss of a job, the end of a relationship, an illness, a deep depression shatters the ego's illusion of control. It is in this moment of collapse and disorientation that the voice of the self can, for the first time, be heard. It is not a literal voice, but an impulse, an image, a feeling. It is the longing for meaning, the homesickness for something we cannot name, the feeling that there must be more to life than this. This is the call to the inner adventure. The first task on this journey is differentiation. The individual must learn to separate the I-ego from the role. Persona. This requires radical self-observation, beginning to ask, am I doing this because I want to, or because it's what's expected of me? Is this feeling mine, or is it the feeling my character should have? It is about creating an inner space of silence so that the true motivation behind our actions can emerge. It is a process of undressing, layer by layer, of false identities. It is painful, as the ego feels diminished, threatened. It will fight to maintain the status quo, but with each layer removed, the connection to the self strengthens. The individual begins to act not from the compulsion to please, but from a center of internal authority. Their decisions gain a weight of authenticity. Their life begins to align with an inner pattern, a purpose that was not imposed from the outside, but that springs from within. The true self is not a static state to be achieved, but a dynamic relationship to be cultivated. It is the continuous dialogue between the ego and the self, between consciousness and the unconscious, between the mask we wear in the world and the truth we live in our hearts. It is the dance of life, where we learn to be, simultaneously, a competent actor on the social stage and a soul faithful to its sacred and unique script. Liberation from the tyranny of the persona does not happen through a mere act of will. The ego does not abandon its command post easily. It requires practices, tools that act as a solvent for the glue that holds the mask to the face, creating the necessary space for consciousness to breathe. These are not positive thinking techniques, which often only serve to reinforce the persona with a new layer of toxic positivity. They are practices of deepening, intended to illuminate what is dark. The first and most fundamental tool is the therapeutic journal, not a record of events, but an honest and uncensored dialogue with your inner self. Writing about the feelings your persona does not allow you to express: the envy, the resentment, the insecurity, the inappropriate joy. Giving voice to the shadow on paper, without judgment, allows its energy to be discharged safely, instead of leaking out in projections or self-destructive behaviors. The journal becomes the mirror that reflects not only the face you show, but also what lies behind it. The second tool, central to Jungian practice, is active imagination. It is a process of consciously entering a state of reverie and interacting with the images and figures that emerge from the unconscious. If you feel blocked by an emotion, instead of analyzing it, you can close your eyes and ask, if this emotion were a person or a creature, what would it look like? And then you dialogue with this figure. You question it, you listen to its answers. It is a way of giving voice to the fragmented and repressed parts of the psyche, of transforming the shadow from an enemy to be feared into an interlocutor to be understood. Active imagination is an inner theater where the ego ceases to be the sole actor and becomes a member of the audience, learning from the drama that unfolds. The third tool is dream analysis. Keep a dream journal by your bed and write down everything you remember upon waking. Dreams are direct letters from the self. Learning their symbolic language, whether through study or with the help of a therapist, is like gaining access to a map of your inner territory. They reveal imbalances, point to unlived potentials, and offer a perspective that consciousness, limited by the persona, is unable to see. Finally, the practice of mindfulness is crucial. It trains the mind to observe thoughts and feelings without identifying with them. Through meditation, you learn to witness the torrent of the persona's impulses. I need to impress. I can't fail. What will they think? As clouds passing in the sky. Instead of identifying with the storm, this practice creates the inner witness, that point of consciousness that knows you are not your thoughts, you are not your emotions, and you are certainly not your persona. It is the creation of an inner sanctuary of peace, from which you can observe the theater of the world without being dragged onto the stage. These tools, practiced with consistency, transform the psyche into an alchemical laboratory where the lead of unconscious identification is slowly transmuted into the gold of consciousness and inner freedom. The conclusion of the inner journey raises the most frightening and pragmatic question of all. How do I live in the world now? If I abandon my mask, won't I be destroyed? Will I lose my job, my friends, my family? This fear is the last and most powerful trench of the ego's resistance. The answer is that authenticity is not synonymous with social recklessness, nor an invitation to brutality disguised as honesty. True authenticity, born from integration and connection with the self, is not the absence of a persona, but its conscious and deliberate use. The difference is the same as that between being a puppet and being the puppet master. The individuated individual does not destroy their persona, they resize it. They transform it from rigid armor into a versatile wardrobe. They learn to choose the appropriate outfit for each occasion, not to deceive others, but to communicate effectively and respectfully. At work, they can wear the persona of competence and professionalism, but they do so knowing it is a tool. Their self-esteem is no longer tied to their performance. They can receive criticism without it becoming an existential attack. At home, they can remove this persona and wear that of vulnerability and intimacy with their partner, allowing themselves to be seen in their totality. This flexibility is the opposite of falsehood. Falsehood occurs when there is a disconnect between the mask and the inner feeling, conscious. Authenticity occurs when the mask is chosen to serve an inner value. For example, you may not feel like being patient with a difficult colleague, but you choose to wear the mask of patience because your inner choice is to serve the value of harmony or professionalism. The action is external, but the motivation is internal and authentic. This requires constant inner negotiation. It is a delicate dance between fidelity to one's own essence and the need for adaptation to the collective. There will be times when your inner truth will conflict directly with the world's expectations. It is in these moments that courage, nurtured by the connection with the self, becomes essential. The integrated person can say no without guilt. They can express a dissenting opinion without fear of abandonment. They can choose a less conventional life path because it resonates with their inner purpose, even if the world considers it a failure. To live authentically in the real world is, therefore, a balancing act. It is knowing when the persona is a necessary bridge for communication and when it becomes a wall that isolates us from life. It is having the wisdom to wear the mask without ever again forgetting the sacred and unique face that it now serves and protects. The ultimate goal of the great alchemical work of individuation is not purity, but wholeness. It is not the elimination of the persona, but its redemption. At the end of the journey, the mask, which was once a leaden prison, opaque and heavy, is transmuted into a crystal bridge. It becomes transparent, flexible, and strong, no longer hiding the true self, but allowing its light to shine through it in a way that the world can understand and receive. The integrated persona is the masterpiece of the self. It becomes the conscious and artistic expression of the soul in the world. The individual is no longer at war with themselves, trying to repress their shadow or conform to an idealized image. They have embraced their totality. They recognize that they are simultaneously strong and vulnerable, generous and selfish, luminous and dark, and it is from this radical acceptance that they act in the world. Their persona is no longer reactive, shaped by the fear of others' judgment. It is creative, shaped by the intention of their inner purpose. The carpenter whose professional persona becomes an expression of his connection with matter and creation. The scientist whose intellectual persona becomes a channel for her awe at the mystery of the cosmos. The father whose persona of authority becomes a vehicle for his love and wisdom. In all these cases, the social function is no longer a burden or a false identity. It is a ritual, a sacred way of bringing what is inside into the world outside. The person who has reached the stage of integration exudes a quality of presence and natural authority. They do not need to prove anything. They simply are who they are. And this authenticity is paradoxically the most powerful form of influence. People are drawn to this wholeness, for it resonates with the longing for totality that exists in their own souls. It becomes a living mirror of what is possible. The journey ends where it began, with the need for a mask to live in the world. But the traveler's consciousness has been irrevocably altered. He departed as a slave to his persona, an unconscious actor in a script written by others. He returns as a master of himself, an artist who uses the mask as a brush to paint his unique masterpiece on the canvas of existence. The persona, finally, ceases to be the guardian of the ego's prison and becomes the humble and glorious servant of the self. The crystal bridge is complete, and through it, the soul can finally walk freely between the two worlds, the inner and the outer, uniting them in a dance of a full and meaningful life.